And I look across, and there stands my mother, and she's hair, body, she's got on her dress, she's wringing her hands. She's just wringing her hands. And the person I was talking to is a really good friend of mine. I said, my mother's here. And she said, your mother is dead. I said, I know, but tell her, because she's standing right there.
Conversations for change, because the world is ready. Well, hello and welcome back to Conversations for Change. Today, I am having an interview with Sandy Queen. And Sandy is a friend of a mutual friend of ours who was introduced to me by someone who I have spent the last year and a half, I would say, off and on, a certain number of times a week, working with on dream analysis, dream interpretation, channeling, energy healing, and a host of other things within our group like Conduit. So, Sandy, you were brought to me by Miley because Miley thinks you are a fascinating human being. And I have to say, I agree.
Well, thank you, Becky.
So,
I appreciate that. Miley and I have been meeting together. Well, our Healing Touch group has been meeting together. And then Miley and I, because we share kind of a similar faith background, have been working together in the last year. So just kind of exploring things for our own lives. So then she mentioned you, and here we are.
and here we are. So, I wanted to sort of start by talking a little bit about how the world of all of these things that are outside of what we think of as quote unquote normal, but not crazy, came to begin to open up for you, because I think you have a very particular story that will help people understand that we don't always have control. I certainly know in my own life, I have not had control over the experiences that have come to me that have opened these doors for me. So why don't we start there, and you can just give us the background of how you ended up beginning to have these extra normal experiences.
Well, first of all, I have to say I'm a Southern Baptist preacher's kid. So that, for any of you who have been in that background, you kind of know my background and the parameters of that. And about in the early 90s, whatever, we had a huge snowstorm here on the East Coast. And I was at my sister's house in South Carolina. And my brother-in-law was a Southern Baptist preacher. And we breed them in our family. And everybody had gone to bed. And I was standing, it was like midnight. And I'm standing in the kitchen, in my sister's kitchen. And her house was laid out as a big great room, and then dining room on this end, and then there are doors that kind of went around the great room, and there was a little hallway here, and my niece's bedrooms and a bathroom right across from the kitchen, and then their bedroom and another bedroom. So I'm standing in the kitchen facing the kitchen wall, and I take a look out across from where I'm standing, that little hallway that goes to my niece's rooms, and there stands my mother. Now, at that point, my mother had been gone 79. So she passed in 79, and now we're in 93. So she's been gone a while. And I look across, and there stands my mother, and she's hair, body, she's got on her dress, she's wringing her hands. She's just wringing her hands. And the person I was talking to is a really good friend of mine. I said, my mother's here. And she said, your mother is dead. I said, I know, but tell her, because she's standing right there. And so I looked again, and she's standing there, and she's wringing her hands. My biggest regret in all this is that because it was such a shock, I did not continue to look. I looked away because I was facing the opposite direction. And then the third time when I looked back, she was gone. That was my disappointment, is that I had looked away and I didn't see her again. And I thought, I was leaving the next day because a snowstorm was coming. And so I made the decision not to tell my sister. I thought, I'll just wait till I get home. I'm not going to bring this up as I'm leaving. Oh, by the way, mother was here last night. So when I got home, I called her to let her know I was home through this I didn't get home for like 2 days, but when I finally got home, I called her and I said, I need to tell you something. She said, you saw mother. And I said, oh, she said, she's been here.
Oh,
She said,
wow.
did you,
So she already knew.
she already, well, she had a cat that was this, that she had, my sister had a chair that was in the living room that kind of, the back of it was to that little hallway. It was diagonal. And she had a table next to that chair and she had a lamp on that table. And at that point, she had this cat that loved to put his head up under the lampshade to get his head warm for whatever reason. And so he would sit there and she would say, all of a sudden, he would stare at that hallway. And she said one night, and we so this, therefore she was standing right directly behind my sister. And she said, I saw her one night. And so when the cat would start that, I would just say, hello, mother. She said, she's been here. She said, do you think there's something going on with the girls? And I said, I don't think so, because the girls hadn't been born before my mother passed. So she's there just to see her grandchildren. But there's something going on. So I
Right.
went home. So I went home. After I got home, I did something that probably not many good Southern Baptist girls do. I made an appointment with a medium recommended by a friend of mine who was very grounded in this kind of thing, which I wasn't at that point. And so she gave me the name of this gal. And on a really cold February morning, I went to see her in her little room where she had, at that point, we were in tape recorders and cassette tapes. And
Mm-hmm.
so she taped everything. And it was like a cold February day, and there are birds against the windowsill. And I mean, it's just chaos, not outwardly chaos, just like the universe was just. So she said, there's somebody here named she said, there's somebody here. And she said, it is your mother. So she described her and it's like, yep. And she said, well, I said, there's something wrong. She said, she's here about your dad. And I said, there's something wrong. She said, no. And then she described my dad's house. She said, does your dad live? Yes. Does he have a little alcove when you come in the door? Yes. Is there a big black desk in that alcove? Yes. Is there a metal box under that desk? Yes. In that box, is that your dad's will? And I said, yes. And she said, that's what your mom's here about, that something needs to be done with his will. And so she's saying to you, call Elizabeth. Now, Elizabeth was my ex-husband's aunt, and her husband was my dad's attorney. We have very close-knit families, even after divorce. We're just, that's the way it was. You got to call Elizabeth. I said, okay, well, you call your ex-aunt-in-law to tell her that my dead dad showed up to say I needed to talk to her husband about my dad's will. That's a little scary. So one morning I didn't do it. And one morning I woke up and I felt my mother. I didn't open my eyes, but I knew she was down. She was looking at me. So before I opened my eyes, I said, okay, I'll call Elizabeth. So I called Elizabeth and I told her, and she said, not surprised. She said, I believe in that. And she said, I just told Earl that we need to look at your dad's will. She said, I just said that to him. Well, it wasn't that Daddy was having a problem. Earl died very shortly thereafter. And apparently my mother knew it somehow, and she wanted to get whatever needed to be done with the will done before something happened to Earl, which got done. The postscript on that was in February. In May, I thought, okay, I'll go back, check in with Allison, and make sure that I've covered all my bases. And on the day that I checked in with Allison, I was going to my daughter's medical school graduation. She was graduating from medical school. So Allison's on the way. So I stopped in and she said, well, your mother's not here, but there's a lady named Mary here. And she's a grandmother. Do you know who that is? I said, I do. That's Elizabeth's mother, my kid's great grandmother. Okay, so that's their great grandma Mary, Elizabeth's mother, Earl's mother-in-law. And she said, well, Mary says your mom's fine, about. And then I said, well, that's really nice. And I said, I'm going to my daughter's graduation today. I said, Grandma Mary should probably come, but she doesn't even have to buy a ticket. She can just walk through the wall. The tape case, Becky, there was a cassette case sitting on the table. The cassette case went across the table, hit the wall on the other side of the room. And I'm like, oh, I think I made her mad. I don't know. Alex, we just looked at each other. It's like, okay, then. So I took the tape with me and I listened to it, and you could hear the tape case fly across the wall, hit the wall. Went to play it for my daughter. Tape is erased. There is nothing on that tape. Nothing. So I'm like, okay. So I put it in my, because at that time, that's what we had, cassette tapes. So I had a big rack on the wall with all my cassette tapes on it. So it wasn't too long ago, maybe less than a year, I'm going through all those leftover tapes down to the last of the Mohicans here. And there's this tape, and I put it on, and it's all there. It's all there. So that, after seeing my mother, she showed up. I mean, she has shown up several times since then. I had a house in Virginia. I live in Maryland, and I had a house in Virginia at the time that I'd go on the weekends. And there were times when I would leave, I would look up and she'd be standing in the window. And so
let me just clarify that you'd be leaving the house in Virginia, where you would go for weekends, and you would see her in the upstairs window.
I was there in the upstairs window. And I had a favorite picture here, a favorite photograph of my son and my grandson that was in a pewter frame that I loved. And all of a sudden it wasn't here. And I said to my kids, do you have any idea what happened? No, Mom, we have no idea. I said, it sits right here. That weekend when I went down to the house, it was sitting right there on the dining room table. And trust me on this one, I did not take it down. And if I had taken it down, I wouldn't have put it on the dining room table. So she has been...
Yeah.
She's been around. Yeah.
It's fascinating to me how things like that can shift and change outside of what we think of as normal. And I think finally we're reaching a place where people actually now consider that some of these things actually do happen, as opposed to just immediately assigning blame to the person telling the story as being cuckoo.
No, it's true. And I worked a lot with kids at the time, even though I was raised in the Southern Baptist Church. I worked for 35, 40 years in the Catholic school system, which was, I loved. I mean, I was there for years, and I taught pre-K to 8th grade. So I was around a lot of the kids, and there were times when I remember one of our quiet boys, he had his mom's best friend, who he considered like an aunt, had passed suddenly. And the teacher said to me, just take him and talk to him, because he's just so upset. And I wasn't doing anything that there were going to be any spirit showing up. So we went down in the room, and he's sitting right across from me, and right behind him is this woman. And she kept showing up, a pretty lady with dark hair, and she'd show up with the quintessential page boy, right? And then she'd show up with her hair short with glasses on, and then she'd show up with the quintessential page boy. And I said, what'd your auntie look like? And he said, well, she had two favorite hairstyles, and of course that's what they were. And he said, my biggest thing is she's gone. And I said, oh, I mean, this is like after an hour of talking. This was not a short conversation. And I said, well, what did you like best about her? Because that's what she's telling me. Ask him what he liked best about me. And he said, he taught me how to train my hamster. And I said, well, that sounds like fun. And he said, yeah, we learned how to train my hamster on the wheel and do all this. I said, well, here's the deal. You're always going to know how to train your hamster. And when you grow up and become a daddy, if you become a daddy, then you'll help your kids train a hamster. And if you're an uncle, you'll help your nieces and nephews train the hamster. And I said, so as long as you train hamsters, guess what? She's still with you. And she was standing there like this, just kind of smiling, with her hair changing from the page boy to the glasses to no glasses. It was kind of interesting. But that's the kind of that's the kind of expense. Then in that school, by the by, that was over 100 years old and has since closed, but over 100-year-old Catholic school with a lot of nuns running around, right, in spirit. There were two little kids that showed up. They were really, really cute. And a friend of mine was born with a veil. She was Sicilian, very Catholic, very Catholic. When I say that, I mean, her faith is so, so strong with her. So, but she and I together were pretty interesting because it was kind of like a double whammy. So we're standing outside the school one night. She's facing me and I'm facing the school. And I said, turn around and look in that window. And there's two little kids. And I bring this up because my daughter got really concerned, my youngest, when this started happening to me, because I would see people in my kitchen. A friend of mine's son died, and I came down the next morning. He's standing in my kitchen. I'd never met him before. And he said, tell my mother I didn't think I had a choice. And then when I saw his picture, she said to me, is that who you saw? And I went, oh, yeah. She said that was the last photograph we had taken of him like 2 weeks before he passed. So I have enough what I'm saying is I had enough validation to know that I wasn't making this up. So my
Right.
daughter kept saying, Mom, I'm really, promise me that when this happens to you, you will say, in the name of Jesus Christ, who are you? I was like, okay.
Right.
As a good, I can do that. So
Yeah.
I do it, and people don't change. They're there. These two little kids, little Dutch boy haircuts, pigtails, cute as bugs, probably 7 years old, boy, girl, start showing up in the school, in the milk room, at teachers' doors. I thought they were cute. My friend said they're evil. I said, they're not evil. They're just cute. So one night I saw them on the stage at the school and we were there for something. And I said, look, there they are. And so they went back toward the stairwell and I followed and she followed me. She could see me. I could see them. And she said, Sandy, they're evil. I said, they're not evil. And so I said, okay, let's do the test. And I was like, in the name of Jesus Christ, who are you? She said she could see my face and I could see the kids. Have you ever done one of those programs that will morph your face into something that's really bizarre? Well, that's what happened. Those little kids morphed into the most evil things I have ever seen in my entire life. And I'm like, oh my. And then they were gone.
Yeah.
And she said, I told you. I told you. So when I got in the car that night to drive home, they were with me. And I don't know how I knew to do this, but it has worked with me many times when I've encountered, because you will encounter evil. That was my big lesson, is that you will encounter evil and there is evil. So you have to be careful. But for the most part, those who show up are friendly, for want to another word.
Right.
And I just said to them, you know what? I'm going to wrap you in white light and I'm going to send you back to your source, because as long as I don't own you, you can't hurt me. So we're going to wrap you in light, send you back to your source. And they were gone and they didn't come back. So that's kind of the encapsulated version of my journey. There's, and I see people all the time. So it's not unusual for me to see people around you or around any, I just don't mention it unless I think there's not a lot of people that want to
Right.
go, oh, you got dead people standing around you. So
Well, I think there are a couple of things I want to say about that, all of that. First of all, it's clear, I've been trained in shamanic psychopomp work, which is helping people, assisting people in transferring over. And certainly when you have, for whatever reason, when that light comes on in you, when you become someone who's capable of perceiving those who have transitioned, it's not a secret. It might be a secret to the people who are in physical around you, but you become sort of a magnet to those who are looking for help in their transition. And certainly when you do that work in a serious way, there are some protections you have to put in place, and you have to use your own spirit guides and helpers. It's not work you do by yourself. What you did, your response was correct to simply wrap them in the light and send them back to source. Because what you're doing in that case is not trying to do something yourself. You're giving the permission that's needed from the universe. You're being the one who's saying, in this moment, I'm the one in a physical body and I have the power to command. And so you do. It does not mean that there's somebody out there gonna get you because you suddenly can see things, but it does mean we always, always, always attract everything in our own field, always. And none of us are pure as driven snow. We just aren't. We all have past lives. We all have different incarnations. We all have ancestral history. I was just reading a piece today that was fascinating, that from a 10-year-old boy in Japan who has demonstrated that memory passes through generations with butterflies, even through the stage of moving from a caterpillar to a butterfly in the chrysalis, and generationally from one set of genetic parents to the next without any prior history themselves of the experience which caused the memory. And we've seen this before in a couple of different ways, but we're now beginning to really understand that genetically we carry forward information. And if you think about it, it's not hard to figure out, right? Especially with
No,
humans.
no, it's not, because I work with people who are in recovery, and the eugenics of the past generations, it's like you're afraid of boxer. I mean, in my situation, I was afraid of boxer dogs, not underwear,
Right,
but boxer dogs. I was afraid of boxer dogs, and I couldn't figure out why I was afraid of boxer dogs. And my mother was afraid about, it was like there was fear of these dogs. And it's because what happens in this field is that the person who has the original memory passes on just enough information that gives the next generation that feeling. And then it becomes DNA. It becomes embedded in the DNA, like you said. And then there's just
right.
no way to trace it until you can bring it out and realize, really get a hold on it, and then
Right,
change it from that aspect. If it's a negative thing, the fear of boxers is like, oh, it's because it's like the story on the little girl that says to her mother, why do you cut the ends off the ham?
right,
And she's like, because
exactly.
my grandma did. You go to grandma, and why did you cut the ends off the ham before you cut? Because my mother did it. Great grandma, thank God, was still alive. Great grandma, why did you cut the ends off? Because my pan isn't big enough to hold the whole ham. So there's no magic in cutting the end. It's just because it's an observation that becomes generational, that becomes DNA driven, basically.
Exactly. And the thing is, if you think about that with any kind of discernment, and you look back at the most recent centuries of history of humanity, you can see lots of reasons why people have a lot of embedded trauma. And that trauma needs to come up to heal. And if you think about it, like, for example, in the case that I was just looking at recently in my own life, it was an event that happened in my mother's life as an infant. Well, she was 2. Um, but guess what? When my grandmother was 2, she was carrying the eggs that became my mother. And when my mother was 2, she was carrying the eggs that became me and all my siblings. So any physiological experience she recorded under the age of 7, pretty much, because we're in theta at that point all the time,
Mm-hmm.
got recorded into her biological system and stored in every cell and every aspect of her being, which means it was in all of us too. And we don't
That's
identify it as such until we come to the place where we begin to look at what are the things that are what's happening in my world that is holding me in a place I don't want to be. Right. And that's when we begin to be able to explore and find the answers to heal. And then we have to do the healing work. We have to release these belief systems that are not ours. And whether we do that with frequency or energy healing, And it's one of the most fascinating things to me because I think we do it through our dream work. We do it all these different ways, right? Neurologically, through our nervous systems, through our dreams, through our energy healing work. We all
And
have
it's
the work
hard.
to do.
Yeah. And it's hard if those things happened early in life because, I mean, I always say to my early childhood people whom I also work a lot with, if I could get recovery and early childhood together, we could put recovery out of business in a couple generations, because the reason this happens is because we don't get it down here. That's just my take on it. But I always tell my early childhood people that they are, of all the educators and all the caregivers that a child can have in the very early months, they're the most important because they offer consistency and they know how to, it's just so many facets in there because babies
Right.
can't remember. They can't remember. They're looking for that, connection, and they develop very early their sense of attachment to their primary caregiver and how they respond. And then that gets passed down because it becomes internalized in the neurological system. And
Right.
it sets the whole system in motion. And it's hard to narrow down in my generation what happened in my great grandmother or my grandmother, even my mother, even of what happened to them that I'm still carrying. So when we have the ability to help people tap into their energy and give them permission to go back and search, and this comes bubbling up, a lot of times
Exactly.
when I'm working with somebody and this comes bubbling up, I will see someone right behind them. I will see, um, I don't know who they are, but they're dressed, for the most part, dressed in clothing that tells me what era they're from. Because I'll
Right.
see people that I know from the 1800s. I'll see people I know are from the 1940s. I'll see people that I know that are, and I will say to whoever I'm talking to, if they can handle it, and I think it's appropriate, who do you know in spirit that looks like this? You know,
Hmm.
and they'll say, "Oh, I know that that's my grandma. I know that that's my grandma." I said, "Well, they're here. They're not. They're here to kind of wrap their arms around you at this point." So you kind of get an idea of where this comes from. In my situation, I get a kind of idea where this comes from by looking at who shows up from what era. So you kind of can narrow it down to where this
Right.
started.
Well, and I think also, I know I have there are several people in the world that I know who do deep ancestral work where you literally, and I've gone through that several times, where you literally line up both lines of your ancestors behind you, your mother's side and your father's side, and you go back through and you ask everybody to come forward who needs to come forward for healing. Because what I've learned in my own work with this is that it's not it's not the people who are there to support you who are need to be released. It's the people who had, and mostly people who were separated from the family, who were either disowned or not supported, or were told that they were not to be part of the family because of something that happened, that they were not good enough, or they committed some crime, or it could be any number of 100 things especially in the past 500 years. And those people are still waiting to be brought back into the family line and released into forgiveness. And there are several people who do amazing work with that. One woman, I can't remember her name off the top of my head, but she does something called a Court of Full Atonement, which she calls forth for the whole family. And she says, may every ancestor, may every being in this family, in the whole line going back, find peace, find forgiveness, find unconditional love in their hearts from all of us and for themselves. And that work changes everything, because those energies are the energies that continually disrupt the family system moving forward and the nervous systems of the people who are the descendants in those families.
It's very true. And I had a gal tell me at a conference, I was supposed to go on and talk, it was a youth conference, and she came to pick me up from the airport. We were at the place where I was going to present, and right before I'm supposed to go on, we're walking down, and she says, "You know, you were your mother's mother in a former life, right?" And I'm like, "Seriously?" And she said, "Yeah." And I was like, "Well, all I can say is I must not have been a very good mother because of what happened to me." And she said, "Oh no, you were a very good mother, but something in her needed to pull you down, and that was her goal in coming into this life, was to pull you down." I said, "Well, she did a great job of it, right?" So the whole thing of letting that go for me, that's been my biggest, hitch, is that
Mm-hmm.
she would have done better if she'd known better, kind of thing. If she'd known better, she'd have done better. And I have to let that go. But it's very hard when it really colored who you are as a child all the way, into your adult
Yeah.
life. But on the other side of that, had she not done that, I would have not done what I've done. And I've had an amazing life. So there's two sides to that story. But and the people I've met, I have a friend who's Cherokee, an amazing, crazy woman. I mean, just amazing and funny and wonderful, and knows the native spiritual stuff really well. And years ago, before computers were really prominent, I mean, we're talking what, 30 years ago now. She taught at the University of North Carolina in Winston-Salem, and she called me one night. She said, "Oh my God, Sandy, I was doing work with angels." She said, "We got to talk to the angels." And I said, "Okay." And she said, I'm getting this dream. I've got this Lakota word that comes to me in my dream, but that's all. And she said, "I see this man in a red shirt." And all I can say is I call him Grandpa Red Shirt, Grandfather Red Shirt. He's native, and he's got a black hat on, a red shirt. And then I see this kind of village of teepees, and I see this word. And she said, "I have no idea what it means, and I'm just going crazy here." So we did, when you a friend, when I did my angel communication stuff, it's free writing. "My dearest child, you're very much loved, and I'm going to let it rip. Just whatever comes to mind. Don't judge it. Don't worry about it. Just let it rip." And um, it's your messages from the angels, if you choose to believe that. So I was like, "Okay, let's do it." So we're on the phone. I'm sitting in the kitchen, and we both start, "My dearest child, you are very much loved, and I got." Oh no, she had not gotten the word. That's right. She had gotten Grandfather Red Shirt and the teepees, but she had not gotten the word. Okay, so my message was, "Check your computer," and her message was Shakundahai. That was the word she got, the Lakota word, Shakunda. She said, "I got one word." And what'd you get? Shakundahai. I said, she said, "What'd you get?" I said, "It says check your computer." And normally you get this whole thing from the angels, right? I get check your computer. She gets Shakundahai. She said, "Okay, I'll be right back." Well, she had to go to the university to log on because nobody had personal computers that much. So she logs on, she calls me, she goes, "Oh my God." And so she says, "Log on, log on, log on." So I go and I had a laptop. So I'm logging on to this website, and there it is, Shakundahai. And it was the gathering of, it was a, it was a call for everybody to come to the test sites in Nevada. And there was his picture, Grandfather Red Shirt, black hat, TP Village, the whole 9 yards. And the two of us are just like, "Oh, wow." There's a date. I said, "You have to go." She said, "I can't take off from work." I said, "You don't have a choice here. And you got to figure this out, but you can't not go." So she went, and it was amazing. She said, "If you looked on the mountains around you, you just saw the elders. The ancestors were everywhere." And she went to Grandfather Red Shirt, who has a name, by the way, and I can't remember what it is. And she said, "I dreamed about you." He said, "Of course you did." And he was not, because that's what he did. So I went on the website. We got it. I ran a copy of it. I have a copy of it upstairs in my study. And I told somebody else about it that went on, and the website did not exist. It just, nobody could ever pull it up again. It was just the two of us. I have a
Right.
copy of it with his picture, but it wasn't meant for anybody else. It was just meant for us. So when you have combination of your dreams and your ancestors and what people don't understand too is you can see people who are still on this plane incarnate, you can see them in spirit. So it's not just people who passed, you can see people like
Mm-hmm.
I was in a meeting and this beautiful man shows up right behind a friend of mine who's presenting. And he's gorgeous. I mean, like Errol Flynn gorgeous, right? So afterwards I said, who do you know in spirit? She said, he's not dead. She said, he's very much alive. She said, he tried to jump off the San Francisco Bay Bridge on the same day that she and her fellow cancer ladies were out doing their boating, their or they were out they have a dragon boats, and so they were out doing their thing, and he chose that moment to jump off the bridge, and they saved him. So he's still very much alive, and was thinking about her that day and sending her love, and he shows up during her presentation. So people have very strong energy fields, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's totally true. And I think the further we go down this road of loosening up our understanding that everything comes from the non-physical to the physical, everything here is temporary. Nothing here stays forever. The forever place is not in the physical. And when we really grasp that deeply and understand that we are all, as the beings that we are, forever beings, that means we're the ones who come and go. And that also means we're the ones who can perceive all of these things that are outside of the physical, rather than expecting someone else to do that for you, or thinking that it's outside of your reach. It's not outside of your reach because you are a part of that everythingness that never ends. And I think
And
most of us believe one way or another that when we die, the person that we are is gone. And that's a really unhelpful belief, because nothing that is ever created dies. The physical body will die, but the being who inhabits it always continues.
yeah, I had a bad accident in 2004. I got T-boned. I got hit black ice and got broadsided by a truck, and ended up in the hospital. Obviously, well, not obviously, but I ended up in the hospital with um 80 stitches. I turned away from where I was going to have the impact, and I think what I did is I was pushed up into the trim around the door. Anyway, 80 stitches here. I'm in the ICU, and I wake up the next morning, and my dad died in 2001, and he was standing at the foot of my bed, and my dad loved, if I introduced you to him, I'd say, Daddy, this is Becky. He'd go, hello, sweetheart. And then that was who he was. And he meant it. He was just a loving, loving, loving man. And I woke up and he was standing at the foot of my bed in ICU. And I'm like, hey, Daddy. And he goes, hello, sweetheart. And then it was almost like this, it was just this little blessing moment that I had with my dad. And he was very much there. So, you know, it's always and then people go, well, how can you be, have grown up in the church like you grew up, and your dad was a pastor and all your uncles were pastors, and here you are with this down the rabbit hole thing. And it's like, first of all, let me explain to you, I did not ask for this, right? I did not say, hey, I want to see dead people. I didn't ask for this. It
Mhm.
happened. And as much as I can, I have used it as hopefully a helping kind of thing for people who are experiencing pain, like when my friend's son died. And I was able to tell her what he said. And she said, he said the same thing to me, the exact same words he said
Mhm.
to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, I thought, they're like, my dad and his four brothers are all we're all Baptist preachers. So there was no escape in my family. And I went with a friend of mine to see a medium one afternoon, several years before COVID. And I'm watching this woman who's doing the work, and there's somebody on her back, like piggybacking on her. And I asked her at the end, it's like, who do you know in spirit that had? She said, that's my mentor. She just passed. Why? I said, because she's been riding your back all night. But right toward the end, she came over to me and she said, looked at me and she said, do you know what John 3:16 says? And I said, I do. She said, what does it say? And I quoted because it's one of the Southern Baptist based Bible verses, right? For God so loved the
Well, you
world.
have to give it to us because not everybody is a Southern Baptist.
Well, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever shall believe in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. That's John 3:16. I said, why? She said, do you know what Psalm 93 says? And I said, not off the top of my head. I mean, Psalms has a lot of Psalms. She said, did your daddy have a big Bible that flapped like that? And I was like, oh yeah. And she said, did you have like four uncles that? I'm like, oh, and I'm like, all I can say is they've found me. I'm busted, right? I am busted. I not only have daddy here, but I've got all the uncles here. And I am busted. She said they're dancing I couldn't see them, but she said they're over there dancing on the table. I said, well, that's a good thing, I guess. They're all dancing on the table. She said, your dad says to go home and my daddy's Bible, it was like a diary. Wherever he was reading that day, he would write what was happening, the goods and the
Mm-hmm.
bads. I failed my driver's test. I went to the prom. I had a date. So he would do it. That's his diary for the three girls. She said, go home and look up Psalm 93. There's a message for you. And so I got home and I went and I got his Bible. And around Psalm 93, there is this, never give up the things that you have been given, your gifts. And I'm like, well, hello. It's written in red right around the edge of the margin of the Bible. I mean, so I say that because you have to be careful when you're a religious person or a person of faith that there are people that just don't think this is okay. But I
Right.
think that you're given
Mm-hmm.
the gifts of the Spirit. As we said in the New Testament, we all have different gifts of the Spirit. And I'm hoping that this one is one that has helped people and it can have a negative side for real. But I had one of my former students who took her own life last year, and I did her memorial service, and she was in her 30s, in her late 30s. But I had encountered somebody who had taken her own life several years ago. And in spirit, she's still the feisty, funny person she was here. And so occasionally, I'll free write to her. So I free wrote to her right after this little gal passed. And I said, Anne, are you there? And she said, well, look who shows up after all this time. It's like, okay, all right, let's just, So
Yeah.
and the question I wanted to ask her was, because Miley and I were talking about this, can you change, if you came into this world knowing you were going to leave, and then you get here, the veil comes down, you can't really remember signing on for this, can you change your mind? Could you change your mind? And she said, yes, but the problem is you don't remember you have that choice. So you think you're locked into this. And she said,
Right.
that's the problem. We don't know we can change our minds until it's too late. As soon as we crossed over, we realized we could have made a different choice, but we didn't know we could make a different choice. So I said, I asked her how Katie was. She said, she's fine. She's finding herself. She hasn't quite come to terms with, but she'll be fine. So it's a really, because we're all, it's like a parallel universe where, they're just out of sight, but they're not out of existence.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
And I don't know about Becky, but if they keep showing up here on this plane, is that a sign that they haven't transitioned? When people hang out, they just hang around and they just don't seem to be going anyplace. Is it because they don't think because they don't know how to cross over? What's the deal on that one?
I'm no expert in this field by any means, but I do happen to have just finished reading Laura Jackson's um, The Light Between Us. And she is an amazing medium from Long Island, who this book has become a New York Times bestseller, actually. And she talks at length about the fact that um, the people who are coming, they're coming because there's work to do with somebody here. And she actually is part of something called the Forever Family Foundation, which is out of Long Island, where she was working as a medium, connecting parents to their children who had passed. And it was the most beautiful thing to read her book. My husband and I actually got it as an Audible and listened to it on our most recent road trip. And it was, we thought, we said to each other, in fact, before we left, okay, he said to me, I want to start this book because I do want to hear it, because we'd listened to the little teaser part in the beginning, and a friend of mine had recommended it. And he said, but I don't want to spend the whole trip just listening to this one book. There's some other books that I want to read too. And sure enough, we started that book as we left the house the first day. And we didn't listen to anything else until we got to our destination 2 days later. We spent the
Wow.
night with friends, but we could not, we literally couldn't put it down, even though it was just playing through the speakers of the car. And it was so clear that yes, we are eternal beings, and even our dogs are eternal beings, and everybody is all about one thing, and that is letting everybody here know that there's nothing they can do that's bad enough that the people who are not here anymore will stop loving them. And they always love them, and they never hold them accountable for things that happen, especially the children whose parents lose them. They never blame the parents. And the
I
parents
know,
are so
yeah,
hard on themselves.
I was on a train ride 30 years ago, probably. And I was sitting window, and there was a little gal sitting next to me on aisle, and I really had to go to the bathroom, right? And I thought, I don't know what I'm going to do because she's sound asleep, and I'm like, what am I going to do? Because the way she was, I'd have to crawl. I couldn't get by her. And she opened her eyes. She said, "Oh, I'm sorry, you have to get up." I was like, okay, right? So when I came back, we started talking, and she was a medium, and she was probably in her early 30s at that point. And her whole job, mission, goal, gift was connecting parents with babies who'd been lost,
Yeah,
whether through stillbirth, abortion, early childhood, whatever. And she said, they know before it happens that it's going to happen. So it's not on the parent. And she said, and one of the things she said to me was, the next baby that, and I've not heard this again, so I don't know, have any validation. The next baby that comes through may not be the same gender, but will be the same soul. So you will get that baby back. You may not get the same gender, but you're going to get the
right.
same child. That baby knew before it happened that this was going to happen.
Yeah,
And her job is to connect with the parent so the parent doesn't feel like
yeah.
she said, because they hold no grudge. It's not about grudges, it's about whatever they committed to,
And
you
all
know.
of that, yeah, exactly. I totally get that. And it's very interesting to me because some of the other work I've done is a program called 12 Chakra Birth Wound, where you go back through your memories before birth and you relive your experiences through dream work and meditations and it's like a 12-week program. And you work with the person who's interpreting your dreams for you as you go through it. That's how she designed it. I can put a link actually to that course because I think it's so valuable. I'll put it underneath our program today. Janice is a dear friend of mine who created that course. And during that course, for me, I had some real revelations, one of which was that it took me 3 times to get here to be my mother's daughter. And the first 2 times I didn't make it, and it wasn't anybody's fault. It's just that's how it went. And it's very interesting to me to think about these things, because what I realized, this was such a critical healing moment for me, because I had a difficult relationship with my mother. And when I came to understand what she went through in order for me to get born, the level of my forgiveness and love for her just went through the roof. And I have to tell you, that process is still unfolding for me. I am still moving through more and more levels of reconnecting and loving my mother, because I understand now in a way I never did exactly what the drivers were that were putting her in a place where essentially her heart was broken so badly and so deeply in so many ways that she did the best she could. And what she did was incredible. And when I look at what she accomplished in spite of all of it, I'm still having revelations about it, because I'm still uncovering ancestral traumas that I know she went through. Like I said, there was just one recently that I just uncovered that was just mind blowing. And to think, oh, here we all are saying, Mom, get a grip. It's like, kids, you have no idea. That's what I would say. Kids, you got no idea.
It's true. And then we were saying about animals. A friend of mine who is an animal lover who just passed, she was in her 90s, sent a picture to me one day, a little plaque, and on the back of it, it said, it had her name. It was a gift to her from somebody. And I called her and said, Alice, you're regifting somebody. But the plaque says, heaven is a place where all the cats you've loved will meet you at the gate. Well, that makes me cry. And she said, why do you think I gave it to you? Because it makes me cry. Well, it's right next to the little plaque that says cats don't laugh when they see you naked. So, and the vet said yesterday, at least they don't tell you that they're laughing. But yesterday, my daughter had to put her kitty down. And so it was interesting because I've done some animal communication, and this cat was feral. My daughter got her when she was 6 months old and had her first litter of kittens. So she's, a 6-month-old kitten having a litter of kittens, and they were going to euthanize the whole bunch. And my daughter took and fostered the mother and and adopted out the kittens. But this little girl was not adoptable because she was so feral. And so Lars had her since she was 12 or 14. And this kitty was really, really sick yesterday. So we went to the vet, and I'm talking to her, and she's like, I'm scared because I can't breathe. And that was what was wrong. She had apparently cancer in her larynx, and she can't breathe. And that's why she was coughing, and she could eat, but she couldn't breathe. And so we went through that whole process of, what do we do? It's going to be a major expense to have this done. And my daughter is, she's so, I hope all my kids are very connected to their animals. And she's this daughter of mine, she's just crying because it's so sad for her. And I'm thinking, this is kind of a fun thing. I'm thinking, she's not going to cry like that when I go, right? So in the middle of this, she stops and she said, Mom, do you know what you said to me when Dixie was her dog? She said, do you know what you said to me when Dixie was dying? And I said, what? She said, you looked at me and said, I forgive you. I said, I did? She said, yeah. And she said, I asked you, what are you forgiving me for? And she said, I know. And she said, you said, you're not going to cry this much when I go, so I'm going to forgive you now. And I said, well, that's what I was just thinking. That so they made the kitty comfortable, and we went in to have the final minutes with her before they euthanized her. And Laura's petting her, and this cat looks at me and says to me, don't touch me. And I'm like, I'm not going to touch you. I didn't touch you in 12 years. Why would I choose this moment to touch you? Promise, here's my hand staying attached to my body. I will not touch you. So even in her final, she's saying to me, not appropriate. Don't touch me. It's like, I'm not touching you. Your
Right.
mama's going to touch you. So I do believe that. And I do believe that, they are, yeah, they are here within those animals are around. They are. So,
Well,
you
this
know,
is this is the time of the veils thinning. So yeah, it is true that more and more of this will become more accessible, let's say, to more and more of
well,
us, because more and more of us are stepping into the place where we're willing to allow ourselves to experience these things. And again, I think this is why it's so important to release the trauma, because the more of the trauma you release and the more you can come to a place within yourself of centeredness and groundedness and connection to the energies of source that support you physically and non-physically, the more you can open up to these experiences. Because I know for me, some of the early experiences that I've had in my life frightened me because I didn't understand them, you know. Not so much as I got older, I began to trust it more. But I think, especially because in our culture, we're taught that only the physical is real, right? We're all raised in
yeah.
this left-brained, rational mind culture. But I think pretty much my experience, and I could be wrong, it may not be true for everybody, but my own experience is once you have children, all of that changes. It's all up for grabs because the first time you look at a new baby or go through the experience of giving birth, you recognize that there's something else here entirely.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And it's just, and I was just thinking that the profound moments, like after 9/11, I think my house was a conduit. I would sit on my sofa to watch. Of course, we're all glued to the television. And there was, when you're trying to find a space to sit between people, you're on a long couch and that's how I felt. And it was just me here, but there was no room for me on my couch. And I knew that I had to kind of wedge my way in there because and I had a cat at that moment, at that point, that was a seer. He could see, and my stairwell going upstairs goes up and then it's a landing and then goes up. And apparently there was a portal there and he would watch go up, and he'd watch people go and he'd watch. And it was
Mm,
fascinating to me. And I was downstairs one day working in the office. And I look up and there's this young fireman coming down my steps. He has a full turnout gear, but he's holding his helmet. Irish kid, bright red curly hair. And he just looked at me and I think if you'd been there, it would have been because I think he was trying to find out where he was supposed to be. And I did for him, even though he wasn't evil at all, he was very gentle and very sweet and just kind of lost. He was lost. And so I talked to him for a minute and then I wrapped him in light and he was gone. And so a friend of mine who
yeah,
was on ground zero at that point, who was a police officer, did a yearbook after 9/11. And I had that yearbook and I thought, there is no way I'm going to find, and I opened the book and there he is. There he
hmm,
is. And
which is
it
why he
was,
came to you.
it was one of those moments of thank you, because he was some mama. His mama, I mean, no, he was my son at that moment because he was just
Sure,
lost and scared and lonely and not knowing where to go. So, um,
exactly. And that actually is the work of Psychopomp, the shamanic work of helping with transition. The real work is working in moments of crisis, because in moments of crisis like that, where something so unexpected and so sudden happens and a lot of people transition at the same time, there's a lot of confusion. It's one thing if you're, going through your life and having an experience and expecting something to happen and not expecting to make it much longer or whatever. It's another thing entirely to suddenly find yourself on the other side of transition when you're in the midst of something else. And of course, you could say first responders know that all the time, but they don't, because we're all the same that way, especially when we're young. We all assume we're immortal in our physical bodies because we are immortal, just not in our physical bodies. And so when we find ourselves outside of our physical bodies, it can be really shocking. And we really don't know what to do. And we don't know where we are. And we don't know how to get to where we need to get to.
It's
So,
true.
yeah.
It's true, but it's
I mean,
yeah,
even
and
with
it,
my dad, even when my dad transitioned, you know, he was not the guy who would talk about it beforehand. He kind of avoided it. And when he did transition, um, it was expected. And my brother got to him, and I had sent my brother a note to read to him before he died, um, by email, because I knew I wasn't going to get to the East Coast in time. I mean, we had hours. And so my brother drove down and got in bed with him. He was at home, and read him my note and held him, and he transitioned. And the next morning, I was sitting out on my back deck. And in my note, I had said to him, don't think I'm not waiting to hear. I'm expecting a conversation from the other side. And I told him to say hello to my grandparents and all kinds of things. And so I'm sitting out on my back deck and looking up at the forest and the trees and the birds. And I sit down and I say, so, Dad, what's it like? And I hear back right away, what's what like? And I just burst out laughing. And I said, what's it mean? What's what like? I said, being dead, of course. And I hear his voice so clearly, and he's absolutely incredulous. And he says, oh, is that what this is? I never felt so alive. And I just started laughing because when he had passed, I had felt him go. And I had actually called my brother literally within seconds of his passing, but I'd called his cell phone, which I knew was down in their basement because I didn't want to call the house line because it was after midnight or just around midnight. And so my brother had called me back and asked me why I had called. And I just said, I just knew I had to call. And he said, well, the phone time is within a minute of him passing. And I said, I could feel him go. And it was just this beautiful, big rush of wind. And I still would have thought I made the whole thing up. But later that day, my eldest son came down and told me he had been lying in bed in that still asleep, dreaming state and had the exact same conversation with my dad. So I knew.
it's a gift, and it's a challenge because you're faced with lots of different things, and they're not all pretty, but it's trusting to be able to handle it, and that's in whatever situation that they present. So that's but those are the beautiful ones where you kind of can feel them, see them go, and you're part of that.
Yeah.
It's a gift. It's a gift.
Oh, I
I hear.
think it's purely a gift. And I think we we have to always remind ourselves that we are the ones in this vessel. It's our choice. And if things are happening that are not in agreement with us, then it's our job to stop it.
And
And
you
you've
can,
shown that you do.
yeah, you can stop it. And you can, you know, I think my biggest protector is, um, I was driving a long trip one night and my friend, I told you that was born with the veil. She was Sicilian. She's born with the veil, and that's their legend. If you're born with the veil, the placental veil, you're already there. You're psychic from the get-go. And
Right.
when we're together, it's a friend of ours' husband died, and I was standing at the edge of the funeral ceremony on a summer day. I got there late because our kids' choir at school was performing. Anyway, I'm standing there, and the wife is sitting under the tent. The coffin is here, and I look over at the other side of the yard, and there stands the husband talking to their daughter who had died at 18 of lung cancer, never smoked in her life, just had this really strange case of lung cancer that she died at 18. So I look over at the other side of and there's Chuck talking to the daughter, and he's mad. He's fussing. It's like I called my friend over and I said, "Look over there, tell me what you see." She said, "I see Chuck and he's fussing at Christy." And I was like, he's mad. He's mad because Brenda spent all this money on the coffin. He wanted a pine box and she got him the polished dude. So I went up to Brenda afterwards and I said, "I hate to bring this up, kiddo, but your husband is mad at you." She said, "He found out about the coffin, right?" I said, "He found out about the coffin, right?" Right. So it was very, it was very funny. And I think the other thing is not expecting, like, I want to see somebody around Becky tonight while we're doing this because I want to know. No, it's kind of like
No.
doing your healing is you do it without expectation. And if it shows up, it shows up. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. And I learned very early that I don't say, "Tell me what your grandfather looked like." Because then I'm going, "Oh, yeah, he's standing there." Well, that's pretty bogus. Even if they nailed it and they explained exactly what you're seeing, it sounds like a charlatan. So I learned very early to say, "Who do you know?" And a lot of times they don't know. It could be their great grandfather that they don't know. And so then
Right.
I can say, the person who's standing next to you, is tall, is wearing a watch coat. He's got a gold chain. He's got white hair, very elegant, very tall, very dignified. And sometimes I get a message and sometimes they're just there. They just show up and they're there as kind of a support system. And
Mhm.
then that's how you kind of know that whatever's going on that's unresolved comes probably, don't know for sure because I'm not from that era. And then what I've found, and I don't know if you find this, but if I tell somebody, if I have this thing and I'm like, "Who do you see?" or "Who did you know?" and they tell me, and then I give them the message. If you ask me next week what your grandfather said to you, I was like, "I don't know. I don't remember," because that was for you, not for me. And if I retain it, then I start analyzing it. And if I start analyzing it, I put my spin on it, and that may or may not be what the message was about. My job is to tell you what I hear. Your job is to do the interpretation. And then my job is to let it go, forget it. Because I have people say, "Remember 5 years ago when we were together and we were talking and my grandpa came?" I was like, I really don't remember
Right.
because it wasn't for me, it was for you. And I don't need to carry all that energy with me either.
I think
So,
that's pretty much standard with mediumship and those kinds of that kind of work. I mean, I know it's true for me even with intuitive healing work. I don't remember anything. I mean, I it's funny because people will say exactly, they'll say, "Well, that part." And I'm like, yeah, I sorry. It's not me who's doing that work when I do that work. I get out of the way and whatever's coming through comes through. And I don't have any conscious recollection or awareness, even sometimes, of what it is when it's happening. It's just happening.
it's just happening. And there are times where I'm talking to somebody about what the message is, and I'm kind of standing outside of myself because I'm listening to it for the first time too. It's like you're talking to me, like you've been talking to me, and I'm listening to you. And it's the first time I've heard it, and I'm not conjuring it up in my mind. I'm listening. So a lot of times I'm listening to what
Hmm.
I'm saying, but I'm not thinking it. It's just there. And it's fascinating because it's not an ego attachment. It's just a fascination that you're, Miley and I were on last couple weeks ago, and something came to me, and I said, I got to write this down, and I'm not going to be very articulate because it's coming in really, really fast. And I got to say it. So if I make them, just write it down, because it was just powerful and it was fast. And I knew that I didn't have time to even think about it. I just had to let it roll. So it's,
Yeah.
and I think people say, but don't you remember? It's like, it's not it's not for me, it's for you. And
Well,
so
and not only it's not for me, it's for you, but it's not you either.
not me.
I mean, it's not like you sat there and suddenly had a thought to tell somebody. And I think that's the part when you get into this work in a real way, that's the part. And again, that's why I say so many of my own experiences, I did not sit down and say, now this is going to happen.
Mm-mm.
What happened is something happened. And then I went, what was that? And then for the most part, what I'm realizing now as I kind of go back through my life is that this has been going on since I was a kid. And I learned very early to put it away because it wasn't something you could talk about. And it wasn't until actually I saw an interview with a friend of mine talking about that it started to come bubbling up to the surface. And I realized, oh, I have a lot of these memories. And so my work over the last year or so has been to, when they come, to write them down, because that way I can begin to piece together these pearls that string through my whole life of experiences that at the time they were quite significant. But because they weren't something I would share with anybody, I would quietly put them away and then go back to life as normal, life as usual. And it wouldn't be until another one happened often that it would even cross my mind again.
I know. I was thinking, I had imaginary friends as a child. Jeannie and Francis, two female. I taught them to roller skate. I taught them to do. I mean, because of what was going on in my life as a child, um, I was kind of like, my self-esteem was not all that great for myself. I did well in school because my teachers liked me, so I was a brown noser for real, because I knew that that's where I got my validation. But at home, there wasn't a lot of it. So these friends, where I would teach them to do things, and it was kind of, they were there and they were like, "Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you for doing." And I didn't think about that until just recently. I was like, "Oh, well, there you have it. They were there, but I didn't." And then they,
Right.
kind of around puberty, they're gone, and then I didn't have anything else until, I had that experience with my mother. But and that was 30 something. That was probably 30 years ago now. So it's fascinating of how, when in life it shows up, why it shows up, what's the background, and how you deal with it. How you deal with it.
Right. Well, and I think for many, many children, it's just how it is. And they
Well, they're
learn
closer
as
to
they go
spirit.
through,
There's
as they
Yeah.
navigate childhood, they learn not to talk about it.
They're so much closer to the core, to the spirit, and
Yeah.
if you ask them the right questions as little ones, they will tell you. I mean, those,
Oh,
like,
sure. My
you
children
know
told me for sure.
if you ask I mean, once they get verbal and they can talk to you around 3 or so, it's like, have you seen any angels? Oh, the angel told me, right? So, I mean, they'll tell you that if they've seen something or they've heard something, and they're very innocent, so they don't know that they shouldn't, or that there's a kibosh on them. So,
Right.
um,
Right. Exactly.
it's
And I
it's
think
it's
that's lovely to give them the opportunity to have the freedom and not be, and I think more and more that's happening, that parents are not so quick to say, oh, that's your imaginary friend, or oh, that's something you made up, or oh, that's just your imagination. It's like, don't box them in. Let them have their experience, because it's not up to us. They are divine creatures and divine beings, just as all living beings are. And the further we go down the road of acknowledging that and giving people space to encounter that within themselves and rise to that, frankly, because in our culture, there's plenty of opportunities to sink into other layers of being in, even as a kid. They
You
are
know,
all
when I
around
saw
us.
when I saw my mother, because I was still teaching the Catholic schools at that point, and my older kids, seventh and eighth grade kids, we would have some really interesting discussions on things. And it just so happened that about the time I saw my mother, one of the kids had brought up this Sandy, do you believe in? And I'm like, yeah, I entertain, so then I come back after this experience and we had a class meeting and I told my eighth graders, I was like, I got to share with you what just happened. And one of my boys asked a very defining question. He said, when we were talking about it, he said, was she solid or was she holographic? And I'm like, thank you, because she was holographic, but I couldn't wrap my mind around that because all I could say that I saw my mother, but I realized when he asked me that I could see the bathroom door through her. So she was very holographic, but she was very solid. I mean, I could see her. She was there, wringing her hands, dress, hair, the whole 9 yards. But when he said that, I was like, wow. And when they shared their experiences, nobody talks to them about this. So they think they're weird. And when you get a 13-year-old, a bunch of them going, I had that experience, or I woke up and my grandma was standing at the foot of my bed, or I woke up and my grandpa was hanging from looking at me from the fan above me. They were amazed that how many of them had the same experience. And there was a couple not so good things that were in there too that I really pulled the kids apart and was like, we need to talk about this because this can go sideways really fast. So let's talk about some protective things for you because this is,
Right.
this could,
Yeah.
so it was
But I
fascinating to me.
think about for them, I think the other big piece of that is the opportunity to know that it's something that happens to other people too. Because that's the
Exactly.
part you don't get,
Exactly.
right? That's the
They
part you
didn't,
don't get.
right. They didn't feel so different that they were
Right.
scared to talk about it because they thought,
Right.
I mean, that's middle school where you think everybody's making fun of you. And to have those experiences that they could talk about with a little prefrontal cortex, that they could do some reasoning. It was powerful for them. It was really powerful for them. So,
Yeah, that's great.
I've had a couple of them over the years say to me, I really appreciate what happened in that class. I know this probably wasn't in the theological perspective of what we were supposed to be doing, but it was a growth producing, it was a very spiritual thing because there's like, this is a gift and we're given that, it's like, you're right. So how are we going to use it and what are you going to learn from it? And then
Right.
because of my experience, I could be kind of humble with them because I'm learning along with them. It was nothing that I came with the playbook at all. This was all new to me in my 30s, late
Yeah.
30s, early 40s. So I was, you know, it was new to me also.
Yeah. No, I think it's really powerful. And it's good for me to hear and to think about the idea that, how many people are there out in the world who are going through these kinds of things and having these experiences, and how this ripple effect goes out and more people have the opportunity to really stop judging themselves as freakish or crazy or any number of other adjectives that they could come up with in our culture. Instead, to be able to contemplate the idea that this is simply a gift that they happen to be fortunate enough to have experienced, even if it only ever happens once in their lifetime.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think it's hard for, I go back to this one more time. It's hard for those of us who were raised in a very Christian fundamentalist background, um, it's I think that's one of the most difficult, because you're not taught that this is okay, number one. And what if you're being possessed, or you're being led astray, or it's satanic, or it's of the, and they don't, it's hard to view it as a gift when you've been taught that it's not okay. Although, the Bible has evidence is when Jesus is there, he's got Elijah and Moses standing on the mountain with him. So people did show up in the Bible that had passed, and people saw them. And then people were like, what are you teaching your children? I said, I didn't have to teach my children. My son was in Gettysburg one day, and he's in a house that had been built back and during the war, Civil War, and it had been changed into an apartment, or like a place for kids could stay. They had rooms, and he's sitting downstairs in what was the living room, and he's just sitting there waiting for a friend of his to come home. And this guy walks in the front door, and Bryce had been asleep, so he woke up, and there's this young man walking toward him in a full Confederate uniform, and they greeted each other, like, hey, but because in Gettysburg there's a lot of reenactments, so seeing somebody in a full uniform is not out of the ordinary. Because they do a lot of that on the battlefields up there. So he didn't think anything about it. And he said, I'm watching him, Mom. And he just goes and he walks straight through the wall, through the house, all the other side. And he was gone. And he said, I sat there going, no, I did not just see that. So my kids have all had those kind of
Yeah,
experiences that kind of validate their mother's, kind of, a little off-centeredness there. But it is gift, and it will be what it's going to be. I can't stop it, and I can't deny it. So it's about accepting and figuring out what you're going to do with it.
exactly. And I think for me, the answer is always use it for healing.
Exactly.
Always. And those
Exactly.
and certainly those kinds of events and those kinds of experiences in those kinds of geographical locations are calling for us to do healing more than any place else. And certainly that has been, for me personally, some of the most rewarding work I've done is actually doing healing work for the earth, because so many of these battles, we in the spiritual community of the modern era, people talk all the time about grounding into the earth, about giving it to Mother Earth, about hand over your energy to Mother Earth, she can take it. Well, let me tell you, she has taken it, and she has taken it and taken it and taken it and taken it and taken it. And a lot of the places that I have been that have called to me, where I've literally had experiences where I'm suddenly transported into another time and space where something horrific is going on, that's happening because she's asking us to clear it. And so there is a lot of work that we can do. Michaela Small Wright has written a book called Paralandra's Workbook, which my friends and I in the 1980s and 1980s in Hawaii were working with to do clearing of some of the land there. And there's a lot of healing work to do. And when we do it, it's absolutely transformative. I mean, you can literally see the spirit energies come up out of the earth. You can see it always makes this donut shape in the sky with the clouds. And when you're done, the land is healed. And the souls that are trapped in there, who have not had the opportunity to be set free, are free. And the land responds instantly. So that's something that it's a whole other topic, but it's
I did.
certainly something that when we start to go further down this road of acknowledging really what has happened on this planet over the last centuries at our hands, um, that's the real work, because we not only have to heal ourselves, but we have to help her heal. And I know David Clements and his work, they're doing some amazing things in their meditations, bringing these energies up out of the earth. And he's working with all kinds of, way beyond my understanding and ken of galactics and people I'm just sort of going, oh, okay. But I can feel it when he does that work. And I know, that's our future. Our future is we heal ourselves, each other, and this planet, and give ourselves the opportunity to create a world that we want to live in. Because that's the world that's possible when we take it as our responsibility to heal.
And I think we're transitioning from, we're about to enter a different density here. And
Pretty sure.
a lot of the things that are happening that I get to observe just in people, that even though the world is really crazy right now and there's a lot of negative stuff going on, as we perceive it to be negative, okay, it could be all part of the plan that's just to get us to where we need to be. But there is an increase in compassion. There is. I know that people go, I don't know where you're seeing it. I'm seeing it in little things. I'm a venue coordinator for my church, and so I get to meet couples who are going to get married. All right, and then I get to kind of help them the day of their wedding. I'm there. I'm watching. I get to be part of this whole process, and parties and baby showers and that. And my observation over the last year or so is that people there's a shift. I'm watching a lot more gentleness. And as far as the wedding goes, people, it's really interesting. They're going home earlier and they're drinking less because their partying has taken on a different flavor. It's more about the ceremony and the meaning of the day than it is, let's go to the reception and get tanked. It's really this, I went to one the other night. I went up to clean up and it's like 8:30 and they're going home. It's like, it's 8:30 on your, like, we're done. We partied, we loved each other, and everybody had a great time. And now it's time to go home. And it's that thing of, it's not that frenetic, frantic, we got to party till the cows come home kind of thing. It's like we celebrated, we gave our vows, we love each other, and now we're going home. And I see that in a lot of little minor things that I always say to my couples, how'd you meet? How long have you been together? And then I ask the question, why are you getting married? And they stop, they stop and look at me like, why are you asking me that question? I said, no, why are you getting married? If you're going to buy a new car, I'm going to say, why are you buying this car? Why are you buying this house? Why don't you think it's a good idea to ask yourself why you're getting married? And if they say in the past, they say, oh, we love each other. I say, well, that's not going to work. Because the only thing you know about love is what you know about love at this moment. You don't know about love with babies and elderly parents and loss of job and illness. You don't know about love. You only know about emotional, wherever you are right now. Why are you getting married? And now the answers I get now are just so on target. It's like, this is my best friend. I mean, I can talk to him about anything. We're on the same page. We compliment each other. And then they have this, and I have girls that'll cry and like, nobody's ever asked me that question. I was like, well, I think it's a good question, and they'll call me up and it's like, we've been thinking about your question, why we're getting married. And it's just, I just sense that there's this shift. As you said earlier, the veil is thinning. And we're getting glimpses for the Bible people here say, I see through the glass darkly, 1 Corinthians says, and then I see face to face. And now I see in part, but then I'm going to see in whole. So that's the veil, that we're looking through the glass. All we see is my reflect, but I don't see what's on the other side. And because we can't remember that, we're trapped in this perception of this is the truth. And this is not the truth. This is just the moment that we happen to be in to learn the lesson that we need to learn on why are we here? What's your purpose? What's your service to, or it was, we're talking about in our group, service to yourself or service to others. What's your choice? Doesn't matter. Nobody's judging you. It's your choice. You can be as selfish as you want to be. But you got to make that decision. Are you here to serve other people or are you here to serve yourself? Why are you here? And then the closer we get to being people loving, being here to serve others, we watch that gentle, I'm watching it, at least from my standpoint, watching that gentle shift of people as they, young
Yeah.
men who are they're taking more care of with their kids and their homes, and they're doing a lot of the work. I mean, they're not like come home, put their feet up, and mom does all the work with the kid. No, they're very the guys that I know they're very participatory when they do have children. That
Yeah.
this is their kids. I can't imagine being away from my wife and kids. They'll tell me, and it's like that's a good thing. That's a whole new breed of young men that I see that's been around. So I love that.
Yeah. No, I love that too. And I think, that is the whole point of all of this is when we are in service, we are always able to reach as far as we can towards the highest and best for all. And I think I was saying to my husband the other day, when you come to the place of true understanding within yourself that highest and best for all includes you, it doesn't exclude you, you're part of it, then it changes your ability to step into it wholeheartedly. But I think for the most part, we've been raised so in such a polarized world that we just make the assumption that highest and best for all means everybody except me. And that's kind of how we look out at the world in the old way. And the new way is actually step into unconditional love and see what that feels like. Because once you do, there's no going back.
That's true. And, being able to, when I started doing the healing touch thing, I just like, and I appreciate all the hand motions and that kind of stuff, but I always like, I just want to do Jesus healing. You want to walk, get up and walk. Right. And it's kind of like, but I could do that if I truly believed I could do that the way Jesus, because the last thing Jesus said before he got taken up in the clouds is, you're going to do things greater than I did. And we don't take, and that's final words. We don't really, oh yeah, no, I can't just say, now you can see, but yeah, you could. Yeah, you could. Because you could. It's just that we don't want to allow ourselves to even, because there's something sacrilegious about saying you're going to be better than Jesus, and so you just don't want to go there. But that's what he said. And everybody's going to have a different gift, so you're going to do your way. You're going to do your way, um, and
Right.
it's and then comes in the ability to do this and watch people show up and the messages they bring and the healing they bring, and it's been a very interesting and I think fulfilling journey for me so far. So who knows, who knows what's going to happen. I don't know. I don't know when anybody's going to show. I mean, people are always around me. If you say, do you see anybody? Of course I see somebody. They're I can walk out and see a crowd and there's somebody walking alongside of them. It's like, I don't know if they know it. I'm not going to tell them. You have to be judicious about, hey, there's a dead person walking alongside of you. You have to be careful what you tell people. But
Well, and you're not sure you necessarily know that either. So, but
no,
I
you
think
don't.
I think that is the point. It's not a parlor trick. It's
It
something
is
that
not.
comes for
It,
a
right.
specific reason, and you use it when it comes, and that's why it shows up. And certainly, well, it's certainly been fascinating to get a look into the world that
Thank you,
you
man.
live in, and
Yeah.
I'm very
Thank you.
grateful to have had the time to talk with you about all of this. It's I think we could probably go on talking for hours, but at some
We
point we
could.
need to call a stop to it. So,
We were afraid of this, weren't we? So here we go. Because it's just such a deep subject.
well, I think it's a wonderful subject, and I think the further we go, the more frequently we allow ourselves to contemplate that what we've always thought was the limitation of the physical and the non-physical may not be what we believed. It may be very different, and we may find there are a lot more ways for us to be of help and of service to other people and in situations than we had anticipated.
And it's no reflection if there are people say, I really wish how come you can do this and I can't? It's like, I can't answer that question, number one. And number two is, don't put yourself down because it doesn't happen in your life, because there's something else that you can do that I have no clue about. And I can't be jealous of what you can do that I can't do, because it's not what I was given to do. So there is that realization that you were given chocolate chip cookie and I was given a snickerdoodle, and we got to appreciate that. I will share with you what I learned from my snickerdoodle, and you're going to share with me what you learned from your chocolate chip cookie, but we're not going to bake the same cookies, and that's okay.
Yep.
And that's okay. Well, thank you, Becky. It was great.
Yeah, thank you.